Well, moving on now. So Keir Starmer has praised Boris Johnson.
Don't sound so surprised.
I'm surprised. It's a surprising thing.
Let me tell you what this is. This is him desperately, well, not desperately, this is now we're going to try and shore up the red wall. Now, everybody wants. He wants every vote.
Well, we'll see. Yes, he has praised Boris Johnson for his efforts to level up Britain. The Labour leader said that the former PM had the right idea and accused Rishi Sunak of killing the policy.
Now, Sir Keir, as we said, is launching his party's local election campaign today in the West Midlands, where he's pledged to tackle alienation and powerlessness amongst much of the country. What does that mean?
Well, we'll find out, because joining us now is TalkTV reporter
Hurrah!
Victoria Innes and former Labour advisor Mike Buckley. Well, good morning, Victoria.
Morning, Michael.
We had Rachel Reeves praising Thatcher only a couple of weeks ago, and now we've got Starmer praising Boris Johnson.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I think it will raise some eyebrows among the public for sure. You know, essentially what he's saying today is that Boris Johnson was on the right track. He had some good ideas. The sort of backbone behind it was a good idea. Then in comes Rishi Sunak and sort of takes a bulldozer to it all. You know, not enough devolved power to the regions, to local authorities, you know, and he's essentially taken away that hope. And that's something that he's going to really focus on when he's out in the West Midlands later today. And, you know, obviously the Tory camp, Michael Gove, Levelling Up Secretary, rejecting that claim. He's saying, look, the Tories have made progress, but we did receive a report earlier this week saying only 10% of the money that was meant to go to Levelling Up has actually reached those areas, and that, you know, progress, you know, they promised to reduce inequality. Ministers were unable to provide any examples of what Levelling Up funding has actually delivered so far, and they blame things like a lack of cross-Whitehall coordination between the departments.
I think it's really interesting because, of course, if we can bring Mike in. Mike, I want to get through a variety of subjects with you and Vic, as does Nick in the next few minutes. I know that most people will say that Boris Johnson won the election in 2019 because of Brexit, won the election because Corbyn was, frankly, a disgrace. I do think the levelling up thing that he talked about resonated with a lot of people north of Watford Gap. And I actually think Starmer's right. I do think it'll raise eyebrows, but I do think as a country we need to look at it. I mean, I spent, as Nick knows, she lives born in Blackpool. I spent 15 years in Manchester. I'm still amazed that so many people have no idea that there really is a whole country north of the M25. And I'm being honest, pal.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and I do speak to people in London quite a lot who don't seem to realise there's the rest of the country out there or know what it's like, which is a bit odd, really. But it's just a fact of life, I think, in our country. You know, that north versus south divide really is real. But to take your point on the election, you're absolutely right. I mean, there was polling around at the time and shortly after the 2019 election showing that the Levelling Up was a big driver for people voting Conservative in 2019. But it has got into, you know, history that it was all about Corbyn not being electable, which was true, and it was all about Brexit. But actually, Levelling Up was in there because 5 years ago, people knew the NHS was up to scratch. They knew that their local area hadn't had the investment that it needed for nearly 10 years under previous Conservative governments. You know, they knew that we needed more policemen and women, that we needed more nurses and doctors. So people voted for those things because Boris Johnson was selling them. But what Boris Johnson didn't do was get into power and then do those things. You can argue to a degree that that was because of the pandemic, but actually they just never really put a plan together. As the reports that your reporter referred to a couple of minutes ago showed, they promised levelling up, they never actually got round to doing it. Had they done so, the politics of this country now would be completely different, or it could be completely different, because people did see levelling up had worked, a big change in their local areas. They'd feel much more like voting Conservative
Mikey,
right now.
sorry, no, go on. I just wanted to say, today they launched their election campaign, the Labour Party. You're an ex-Labour advisor. Nick makes a great point. Reeves was quoting Thatcher. He's quoting Boris. As a Labour vote, Labour voters, what do they need to hear from him today? What does he need to say? Meat on the bone.
I mean, bringing up Labour levelling up, I mean, is an implicit promise. Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, they haven't done it. I will do it. The Labour Party will do it. And indeed, if you look at the history of our country, the Labour Party has been the biggest force for social change in our country, undoubtedly, certainly in the last 100 years of its existence, obviously. So it's an implicit promise, you know, we will do that again. Labour got in 97 and we transformed the public realm. And Keir Starmer was implicitly saying, if you vote for me, I will do the same thing. And what he's also saying is, I won't make promises to you like Boris Johnson and then let you down and not fulfil them. You can trust me to fulfil my promises. But he is also, you're right, giving a compliment to Boris Johnson by saying, hey, the guy had the right idea. He just didn't follow through.
I think it's fair enough enough when politicians go across their party lines and actually compliment the other side for the good that they have done. But Vic, do you think people actually see a difference between local elections and general elections? Or do you think the majority of people just go, I'm going to vote blue or red or whatever colour? Do they think that there is a difference between the two kinds of elections?
Well, I think obviously everyone is looking at these local elections as kind of an indicator of what's going to happen when it comes to a general election, whenever that might be. But obviously for local people at the moment, they're really worried about things like the cost of living crisis, local GP appointments, the NHS, so those local issues. Exactly.
Bin collections, potholes.
It's true.
And it's like, do you have a party maybe that you trust more to deal with those kind of issues?
Well,
Really
exactly.
good point.
But also, I think, 2019, Boris Johnson, obviously, people saw Boris Johnson. They saw the character. So they voted for their local election candidates because it was a vote ultimately for Boris Johnson. And I think that's where there may be a difference here. And, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But obviously, Rishi Sunak is quite worried about these local elections. He is worried about what that could mean for the party and ultimately, what it could mean for a general election.
What you've got is you've either got people, you're quite right, who are going to come out and go, right, who's my local candidate, right? Or, Mike, they're going to go, right, this is a protest. I'm going to make a little bet with anybody that wants it. Mike Buckley, I reckon that the Tories will be decimated in these local elections by the people that come out. And I believe there will undoubtedly be a leadership challenge. However crazy this sounds, heard this from too many people, I absolutely believe that when they come back from recess and they get battered in these elections, Rishi Sunak will be deposed by the Tory party that always do it to their own. What are your thoughts, my friend?
I mean, it seems, pretty much certain the Conservatives will do very badly in these local elections. The last ones were held in 2021, so a year later than they would have been because of the pandemic. The Conservatives then were pretty popular because we just got the vaccines, if you remember, so they had a vaccine bounce in the polls. So, of course, 3 years on, they're now incredibly unpopular, almost the most unpopular they've ever been. It's inevitable, therefore, they're going to do pretty badly in these local elections because of the difference between those two poll ratings and, of course, the stratospheric rise in the Labour poll rating. So whether there'll be a leadership challenge in the Conservative Party, I do not know, and I couldn't tell you. It's not my place to advise the Conservative Party what to do, but that would seem mad. I mean, they've had, 3 prime ministers already in this parliament, and it made 6, I think it is, since 2010 when they first got elected, which is a huge number. I don't think they're probably going to think any differently of them if they have another leadership election, other than to think this is a party out of control and more obsessed with its own internal makeup and its own internal psychodramas than it is in serving the country, making our lives better.
Victoria, Angela Rayner, Deputy Labour leader, is to be reinvestigated over council house claims. Can you tell us what the latest is?
Yes, so this has been going on for a little while now. It's about the sale of her 2015 home. And whether, she should have paid capital gains tax up to around about £1,500 on the sale of that home. Now, Angela Rayner says that it was her principal residence and therefore she didn't have to pay tax on it. It was referred originally to Greater Manchester Police after it appeared in an upcoming book, this allegation. They investigated. They said they were certain that there was no wrongdoing here. The Tories went back and said, look, you failed to investigate and speak to her neighbours. You didn't look into the electoral roll. You need to go back and do some more due diligence.
Diligence.
I can't say.
And investigate again and, make sure that no wrongdoing has been committed here. So that is what's going on now. Greater Manchester Police said they will investigate again. Angela Rayner says it's a smear campaign put forward by the Tories. She said she got tax advice. They said there was no capital gains tax to pay.
It's really interesting. If I can bring Mike in, we were talking about this earlier, and I didn't know this. We have to have both sides, Mike, if we've got to be honest. She wasn't an MP, she was a registered carer. That house was the house in which she got the registration of her caring benefits. Here's what we're going to say. Of course it's dirty politics by the Tory party because they are desperate. It happens on both sides. But if you are going to be, Michael Buckley, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, potentially, unfortunately, this is what's going to happen. And this is the ugly side of potentially being in government, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, clearly, somebody on the Conservative side has raked through the records, probably not only of Angela Rayner, probably of most Labour MPs, possibly many of the candidates as well, looking for something they can dig up to throw, something they can throw.
And let's make the point, please. If there's an investigation and she's innocent, she will be found innocent, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, this is going to happen, Mike. It's going to happen.
It will happen. I mean, personally, in one way, I mean, I don't like the fact that poor Angela Rayner is being hounded by this because it's been investigated already. And from the evidence I've looked at, it seems to be an open and shut case. The only good thing you can say about this being investigated is it will draw a line under it. Because if, you know, I assume that everything will be fine and she'll be found innocent and having done all the right things. And therefore, this story ought then to go away.
Very interesting. She is still my political pin-up, Nick.
Well, OK, we can move on to something else now, because Rishi Sunak has spoken out about the challenges of balancing that professional and personal life, hasn't he, Victoria?
Very briefly. Being a dad, yeah.
Exactly. He said, like I'm sure a lot of people feel, that, you know, the biggest challenge of being Prime Minister is balancing that with the needs of being a good father. And that's the toughest part of the job. And it's in a new podcast for The Times. He's talked about everything from what it's like to be Prime Minister to advice for his predecessor. But a lot of what people have picked up on is this line about the struggles of being a good father to his daughters and being a good Prime Minister for the country.
Vic, Mike as well, I really appreciate the early start. I don't know, I feel like saying, mate, honestly, nothing's going to work, Rishi. Grazia is not going to work. A podcast about being
saying
a
you
dad.
have McDonald's
and
with
all
your
those
daughters.
people who go, you're being really unfair to Rishi Sunak, Jez. No. He wanted the damn job 2 years ago. It wasn't even his mandate. Deal with it. Fact.
Right. Thank you so much to
Mike,
Victoria
thanks.
Innes and former Labour advisor Mike Buckley.